Ladies and gentlemen, it's our honor, our privilege to have with us Bob Carrillo, journalist, author, sometime filmmaker, commentator, and all-around great guy, Mr. Bob Carrillo, one of the saviors of Minnesota, one of the truth tellers, a real watchman on the wall. And we could spend 10 minutes talking about his biography. Maybe we should do that in another segment. But Bob, if there's anything you want to say about yourself and your background and how we're triggering people today with our Make America Great Again hats and your Keep America Great Again hat, just put it down a little bit more in the frame there for a second. Put your hat down. Bring your head down.
Well, here, I got a better idea.
There you go. Now we see Keep America Great, CAG, which I don't think is as good as MAGA, but never mind. It's up to Trumpster. He can do it as he likes.
It'll
What do
do.
you got for us, Bob, today? What's going on in Minnesota with all this craziness? Our lockdown, we're in lockdown. We have no free speech rights. We have to stay home day after day because we're not essential, or some of us have papers to go out because we are essential. What are you going to share with us today, Bob, about the people who are running wild in Minnesota? 3 nights of violence in St. Cloud, 3 nights of protests. There's buildings on fire. Why can't you and I go outside? What's going on, Bob?
Well, there seems to be a game of one-upmanship going on around the country. Who can be the most outrageous, the most violent, the most brutal throughout the whole country? And not to be outdone, of course, St. Cloud and those little maniacs up there have picked a fight. They started ugly rumors on social media, lied about the police department up there, and they suggested that the cops shot 2 black young men, which was an absolute fiction, and they did it to a purpose. What really happened is the police officer in St. Cloud got himself shot in the hand, ended up in the hospital, etc.
Right. And the police officers exercised extreme restraint, extreme self-control, subdued the perpetrators, got this person on the ground, no firing, no damage or harm really done to him after he shot a police officer. After that perp shot a law enforcement officer, they spun a false narrative, a patently false narrative to try to whoop up yet more racial hatred in this state and country.
And of course, they did it with intent. And I consider this to be lethal intent. My problem with Minnesota is that there is no one in authority to call any longer. I served 10 years of penance at the Capitol in St. Paul, statewide task force projects connected to the Supreme Court, DHS. I was on the Commissioner's Advisory Committee to DHS for 6 miserable years, and I have the scar tissue to prove that. I had a weekly radio program for 8 years, Common Sense Over the Back Fence, until I finally threw in the towel with regard to all of this stuff, at least at that time. But I was drafted back into service about 3 years ago when I attended a presentation, oddly enough, in St. Cloud at the St. Cloud Public Library.
Good old white cloud.
Oh, my word. And who's putting on a presentation but one of my favorite pieces of unmitigated garbage, Jaylani Hussein and Minnesota Care. And this is my first introduction to this crew. And I come at this from the perspective of being a military brat and in a New York and New Jersey native stateside time as a kid. I don't suffer from being Minnesota nice chronically.
Right.
When I witnessed,
no pathological altruism with you, is there, Bob?
No. When I witnessed in 2017, 11/20 at the St. Cloud Library was Jaylani Hussein and a panel of Japanese Americans being used as shills, along with another gentleman up there. I used to call him until I found out what his name was, Mr. Jabberwocky. His name is Haji Yusuf. Oh my word!
Oh yeah.
He's just a pistol. In any event, the presentation was all about how CARE was going to suggest to the audience and to the members of, the people in St. Cloud and Minnesota, because this was a statewide tour, and it was being done, orchestrated all over the country. And it was all about how we, that'd be us, that,
Bob,
no, hold on, just this is funny. Islamophobes, bigots, haters, xenophobes, a white nationalist. Do I look like a white nationalist? Give me a
Not at
break.
all, Bob. You look like you
We were
might be
going.
from the
We were
south
going
of the
to.
Pyrenees.
When we were going to put them all in concentration camps.
Right.
Concentration camps. He was conflating the post Pearl Harbor internment camps on the West Coast for the Japanese Americans and on the East Coast for the German Americans and Italian Americans with concentration camps. I lived in Japan during the post-war World War II construction. Unbelievably wonderful people, and I warned these people after the presentation because I said nothing during that presentation. And a friend of mine from back east asked me to attend and to record it, which I did. But this was a disgrace. And if you think that
Wow.
was bad, he outdid himself not that long after that
Right.
with his introduction to the audience again in St. Cloud at SCSU, the concept of we are the new KKK. And we're
Right.
guilty of the crime of noticing all the violence, mayhem, stabbings, you name it, gang violence perpetrated by
Pushdowns,
members of his community.
public punchings, random drive-by shootings, right? We're guilty of the crime of noticing, making observations, drawing conclusions, and quite probably making predictions, which is what, after all, makes us human, right, Bob?
And this is not my brochure, Wes.
No. Show
This
that
is
up a little bit
this
higher
is
because it's a little bit off camera. So to be
this
clear,
is
Jelani Hussein
Jaylani
actually
Hussein.
showed
He
that.
produced this flyer.
Yeah.
We are the new, according to him, His Highness, or in my view, His
Yeah.
Lowness. We are supposed to be the new KKK because we notice that there are problems in Minnesota that have been created by this out of control
Group
refugee
of,
resettlement program
yeah.
and inviting people into our country and our community whose behavior in Mogadishu and in Somalia has now been imported into Minnesota, as we can plainly see in St. Cloud and in other places in Minnesota.
Which is why we might wonder why, Bob, Minnesota's in need of an anti-childhood marriage law, which actually passed in this legislature. Why should we even need such a law in Minnesota? We never really, I don't think there was an issue with that until, I don't know which group to, let's not identify them because they shall not be named. We don't want to have this thing pulled down. But he ended up showing that slide of a burning cross with a KKK person in front of it, which of course I don't see at all in Minnesota. That's not within the realm of my personal experience or anyone I know in my community, in my state, county, and local area. I don't see anyone burning crosses, but what I do notice is that there's been something like, is it 18 churches burned in Minnesota? 18 churches burned in Minnesota?
13 churches
14
burned,
churches.
Christian churches burned to the ground since 2012 in Minnesota. Once again, I did not create this brochure. Jaylani Hussein and Mr. Conman and CARE created this brochure, along with the fools at St. Cloud State University, promoting the new KKK warning to the good citizens of Minnesota.
Right. So we're
That's
all
right.
supposed to feel blame and shame for what one white cop did in Minneapolis now. We're all to share collective blame. Universal distributed justice. We're supposed to pay reparations. Isn't that the very definition of racism, to hold an entire race responsible for the actions of one man? And by the way, the response to that one man being killed has been an amazing level of fundraising for the Democrat Party. The fundraiser tab at the upper right-hand corner of the Black Lives Matter webpage will take you to a place to give money to Act Blue. Act Blue, in turn, gives money to the Democrat Party, which ends up going back to Democrat candidates right here in Minnesota.
And through Act Blue, the largest recipient of BLM donations, Biden for president.
Biden for president.
The largest receiver of donated money to Black Lives Matter, funneled through Act Blue, is Biden for president. Don't believe me? Go to their website. You'll see in the URL line, It's Act Blue. But let's
Well,
stay
no
on
doubt the
task. You
natives are
mentioned something.
restless, Bob. It seems like the Democrat urban plantations are actually paying off for Biden. And I think George Floyd probably deserves that gold plated casket that he's in with the horse drawn carriages because he's been a hell of a fundraiser for Joe Biden and the Democrats. Crazy talk.
And you mentioned earlier the shame and blame business. Keith Ellison, Mr. Rabble rousing street guy and protege of the Nation of Islam and Calypso Louis Farrakhan and company, a transplant from Detroit, is
Right.
Keith Ellison. And this guy, and he's a
Bug.
supporter of Antifa. And don't take my word for it; it's all over the internet. This
Show
guy
that up.
has been, since the day he took office, he has been engaged in the shame and blame Minnesotans tour, gaslighting all good, decent Minnesotans. I have lived here for almost 50 years. Almost 50 years. This is the antithesis of the place I moved to, and it's because of this man and his minions. And believe me, Jaylani Hussein, CARE, Antifa, Southern Poverty Law Center, Black Lives Matter, they're all connected by way of this umbilical cord of political power. BLM is a political party now.
It's
And
now
don't
become a
get,
political party. It
yeah,
actually is a political party with a political agenda, and they're more popular than any other individual and party in the United States right now. So we're actually dealing. But then guess what? You're not allowed to criticize this political party. You're absolutely not allowed to ask any questions of this political party or to make any comment about them or to post anything. For instance, we may be in danger of being called all kinds of things
I
for
don't
having
care.
have this conversation today.
I
So,
don't care. And if Mr. Ellison and company, along with Governor Walz, and the rest of these clowns get their way, including Jaylani Hussein, who is on, along with CARE, he's on the governor's transition team, Governor Walz's transition team. And for anyone listening who doubts what I'm suggesting is true, I have a standing invitation. I presented that directly to Keith Ellison personally at the church, the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Rochester. I offered them the same challenge to have a dialogue,
and he
a
said he would.
dialogue, and
He
he said
promised
he
he
would in
would
front of
have a
70
dialogue.
people. And then he backed out on it. That was December 3rd last year with Ellison. Jaylani Hussein, same problem. He said he would relative to his crazy presentation at the Stillwater Library 3 years ago, and he said he would, and he backed out on it. So
Bob,
I'm here to offer a standing challenge to Mr. Hussein and CARE and anybody else from CARE and Mr. Ellison to go on air with me for 2 hours unedited. Let's have that dialogue they're always yammering about. I produced this
well,
piece. Look at this. I produced this piece for the St. Cloud State presentation panel discussion relative to Mr. Ellison, Rebecca Lucero with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, and some converted skinhead guy, a
yeah.
white supremacist from Chicago. So I produced a
Yeah,
whole bunch of
nothing to
questions.
do with Minnesota. Again, they bring up this scumbag from Chicago to infuse racial identity politics into Minnesota. You know, they point the finger at white people, right? With inflammatory statements and say, you're not allowed to notice the stuff that's going on in your state in terms of corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse. And yet, by the way, you know, looking at that data that you're holding up, when you were here in December 3rd, were you aware that you were at Mayor Kim Norton's own Unitarian Universalist church? Because she's the mayor of Rochester, Minnesota. And
Yes, and
Pastor Luke was the host of that political action group, the Council on American Islamic Relations Southeastern Minnesota Outreach Coordinator, Regina Mustafa herself, was on the panel with Keith Ellison that night. There was no listening going on.
and by the way,
It was all pointing fingers.
let's get past all the fake names. Regina Ann Roadfuss from Croydon, Pennsylvania,
Correct.
another rabble-rousing transplant who changed her name to Mustafa. Keith Ellison has many names. a.k.a. Keith X. Ellison, Keith Hakeem Ellison, Keith Hakeem Mohammed Ellison.
Muhammad, yeah.
His real name, Mr. Born and raised Roman Catholic out of Dearborn, Detroit, is Keith Maurice Ellison. Convert to, yes, communism back during that day. A convert to communism. He was big in the Communist Party at that point.
Up a little more.
Big in the Communist Party at that point. He was also big with the Nation of Islam, peddling. Here he is peddling Nation of Islam.
With Louis Farrakhan, no less. And black power groups that were calling for separate ethno-states.
And by the way, this has nothing to do with them gaslighting just white Minnesotans. If Mr. Ellison, per the most recent legislation presented this session in Minnesota, what were to get his way, he would reconstitute his failed, when he was in Congress, H-Res 569, which was an Islamic blasphemy law. Now he's trying to reconstitute that in Minnesota. That would make this conversation between you and me illegal. We could be, and they want, per this legislation, they want to turn the usual suspect groups, Minnesota Care, the LGBTQ crowd, and the radical Jewish community folks into alternative community reporting groups.
They already are.
They are, but they want to give them quasi law enforcement capability.
Right.
Have them file a charge with the Minnesota Department
to visit people's homes, to report people to the police,
Department of Human Rights, and have them charge us with a crime. That in and of itself is a crime. And by the way, the Stillwater presentation that I mentioned earlier with Jaylani Hussein was done on the same Sunday that the Southern Poverty Law Center, Black Lives Matter, Antifa shut down the John Guandolo's presentation in Green Bay, in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, and in Bloomington, Minnesota. That was the same Sunday. So they're all connected together by this umbilical cord of hate and division. And at that and so I mustered the troops and got us all to the Stillwater Library presentation, sat in the front row. People you know and I know were there. And here's Jaylani Hussein, and I have it on film, folks. He can't say it didn't happen. And I asked him a pointed couple questions at the end during the Q&A, which was cut short like that. But during his presentation, his PowerPoint presentation, by the way, CARES, he indicates with great pride that they, in 2017 in Minnesota alone, filed 360 lawsuits against individuals and companies in Minnesota. And with great pride, he says in 2018, we expect to exceed that number. That is not something to be prideful about.
No,
that's something to be ashamed of and should be watched carefully by national organizations, law enforcement organizations, because this place is becoming, well, it already is the Grand Central Station for a terrorist recruitment and training for the entire country.
People were able to convince us that they have the right to compel or prohibit speech. They've come here fresh off the airplane, parachuted into our communities, and they're telling us what we can and cannot say. That smacks to me of a person who doesn't understand the Constitution that this country is founded on.
Oh, he understands. No. I disagree. I think
they understand it and they know how to use it.
He understands it perfectly well. He understands it and uses it.
Right. Well, I was being hyperbolous, if that's such a word. But I agree. They know how to exploit the weaknesses, or actually the liberties and freedoms afforded by our Constitution, the protection of our Bill of Rights. They know how to exploit our values and our ethics and traditions against us as Minnesotans. Particularly Minnesotans are susceptible to this kind of coercion because we're so concerned about what the group thinks of us as individuals. It's that village mentality. It's a Nordic cultural trait, very deep in the people. But are we going to talk about some of these groups that are
Sure.
organizing the current protests?
Let's
Because
start.
these groups are all connected. They're all, like you mentioned, December 3rd, Keith Ellison on stage with Regina Ann Roadfuss Mustafa at Mayor Kim Norton's church. Pastor Luke brought this panel of experts together. And by the way, they also host groups such as the Isaiah, Minnesota, which is called for driver's licenses for all, which is a segue into voter rights for all, regardless of their citizenship status. But can we talk about some of these groups that are active in Minnesota generally? Because people are confused. We see people going to St. Cloud who don't live there. We see people coming to Rochester who aren't from here, waving their fists in the air, doing Black Panther salutes. They don't seem to understand the significance of a Black Power salute that they'll make on stage. They think that's just a gesture. That gesture has meaning, right?
Yeah, and by the way, let's promote this stuff. Let's throw gasoline on the fire. Let's have a story about, and this is Keith Ellison with the community, St. Cloud hate crimes listening session to focus on white nationalism. Hold on just a second.
The community is a phrase.
Yeah, here we go.
You're getting, okay.
Here we go. St. Cloud, targeting St. Cloud.
Sure.
With regard to white nationalism.
Hold it straight, Bob, not curled. Then now it's in focus. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's Keith Ellison once again race baiting and gaslighting Minnesotans.
Well, given his history as a follower of Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, given Keith Ellison's history, doesn't he have some explaining to do about his interest in an ethno state? I mean,
lots of history.
People are incredibly.
The guy, I remember when he was in Congress, he took a Hajj to the Middle East.
Yes,
and I believe some country, and I can't remember whether it was Turkey or the Saudis or somebody. They paid for his trip while he was a congressman.
Correct.
That is not legal. Let me go one step further. He's also a no borders guy.
Right. Hold that up straight, because what we see there is "Yo no creo en fronteras" in Espanol. There we go. Bob, try to hold it perfectly straight so it focuses.
I don't believe in borders, is what he says.
So, yo no creo en fronteras.
Edification. Me llamo Alberto Antonio Cristobal Carrillo. That is my name.
Nice.
I'm not an Olsen, for goodness sake. So knock it off with the white nationalism skinhead crap.
And what I'd like to say to Keith Ellison is, o tu che la festa audace turbato, d'ingegno d'inferno, chi fosti guidato, Ivano indetto, di quanta lantana va trema vigliaro, dell'ira sovrana. Okay, and I'm just saying.
No. Message to Keith Ellison.
Yeah, well, for Keith Ellison,
understand. No. We understand what you're saying, Keith.
Yes.
We can interpret it perfectly.
Nice.
So knock off the crap. It's not flying with people who have a brain and who are adults. Instead of your mayor down in Rochester, she's an adult child. Oh, you wanted the connection? Let's try some connective tissue that people can hang their head on.
People hate intellectuals in Minnesota, Bob. Don't go too far.
It's actually not funny.
Now, we cannot see this, so it's out of focus and it's way too small.
No. Well, so, just look at the. It doesn't. Bob, we don't need to.
It's not working. Okay.
Well, I know that.
We'll include it. We'll include it below the speech. We'll include it in the notes. But what is it?
Here's the kicker. This is the Muslim Brotherhood in North America, connective tissue to a number of organizations, including CARE, the Muslim American Society. They're all active in Minnesota, the Inca, all of them. And Keith Ellison is right in the middle of the mix, promoting his own nonsense based upon that. One step further, this one you can see.
Yes. And there's Jeff Johnson on there, who was a gubernatorial candidate.
Oh, Jeff Johnson, John Hinderrocker, gosh, what's her name with the Center of the
Kern?
No. AJ Kern running for office. A number of different people. And John Gilmore was on.
John Gilmore, amazing. Yeah, haters, big haters, and all have blacked out lines like criminals on their faces, right? They're all
Who
like, and of
and
course that's why we're wearing sunglasses today,
and
Bob.
who produced this? Look at
Care. Oh,
yourself.
Isaiah. Wait,
MN.
what is it?
Isaiah MN and Care.
Yes, yes.
They produced
So
this piece. This is something.
Isaiah
See, this is something
Isaiah
that you see.
MN also operates out of Mayor Kim Norton's Unitarian Universalist Church. Isaiah MN has had meetings there, and they've also sponsored her meetings. I mean, careful how I phrase this. There's connective tissue between these organizations. When you're offered to use a facility for free, okay, when the Council on American Islamic Relations can use your church for free, you know you're hooked up with them. You're married at the hip. Doesn't this bring into some question some IRS issues
One
or
would think.
nonprofit status?
One would think the problem is we live in the Minnesota bubble. This is where, I mean, this is a labyrinth where information doesn't get out on the to the outside world unless people like me or John Gilmore or other people write about it, or what you're doing right here. But I'm telling you, look at this piece very carefully. What do you see? Lines of
you have to hold it. You have to hold it parallel and equidistant from the camera at all regions, because only you're in focus right now.
Lines across the faces of the people that are referenced here. That looks like a hit list. That looks like a call to arms to say they're free game. Go get them.
And they were proud when they were able to bring down former Minnesota State Representative Cindy Pugh. Wasn't it Jelani Hussein who celebrated having taken her out? And they got her, silencing voices, cancel culture is what leftists do. And they're actually busy calling around to churches to try to shut down events. They shut down events at VFWs, at sports clubs. If they sense a conservative event is happening in town, they call up and shame the organizers or the pastors. Nothing weird. This is probably the first time in my knowledge that anyone's had a conversation at all in public about the cooperation of the Unitarian Universalist Church with leftist organizations, communist, Marxist organizations in Minnesota who are active in Minnesota, pushing a political agenda inside a Christian church.
And if they don't like what the Christian church is presenting to the public, like the Baptist church in Cambridge, Jelani Hussein and one of his henchmen show up to pick a fight with the pastor because Shahram Hadian's presentation was being presented about every 2 or 3 weeks. They didn't like it, so they sneak in and pick a fight. But let's talk about something else, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Let's talk about the victims of this stuff.
Focus on the front center with that for a moment so we can see it. There you go.
All right.
Good. We got him. Tell us who that man is. This
man was trained and stationed where I was born, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And don't you change the name of that military base, by the way. I'm very proud of having been born and raised in that 82nd Division airborne environment. This man is deceased. He died on June 8th, 2017, I believe. His name is Special Forces Staff Sergeant Alexander Conrad, KIA in Somalia. He was there with a 500 troop complement along with NATO forces, and he was killed. Guess who paid for the bullets and the armaments that got him dead? Minnesota taxpayers. That's the other problem in Minnesota. The breach of hundreds of social services programs in Minnesota by the new Americans and Somali community, because everybody's looking the other way and letting them do that. The DHS scandals, the daycare scandal, which was the one that was most prominent in the news. I've spoken to the whistleblower who used to work with DHS. They've stolen hundreds of millions of dollars annually for at least the last 10 years.
Bob, you and I know what we're referring to, but for some who are virgins to this conversation, shall we say, they don't connect the dots between the halawa system of remittances, also the fraud, waste, and abuse, $200 million inside the Minnesota Department of Health and Human Services scandal, inside using daycares and adult care facilities, or transferring millions of dollars in suitcases of cash that ends up back in ISIL forces. So you're linking the fraud, waste, and abuse to cash remittances in the halawa system, which is allowed in Minnesota,
but a completely different program. That's right.
Okay, and then back in that side, greenbacks, cash money dollars, end up being used on the blood diamond market, ancient antiquities fraud market, where you're stealing museum pieces, right? The American greenback is used for human trafficking all over the world, which is why some of us were so upset about those pallets of cash that Obama transferred to Iran. And nobody understood, well, why are you so upset? It's just money. Yeah, I'll just print some more. It's because the U.S. greenback is the fiat currency that undermines the near worthless currencies. It's called the near worthless currencies market for a reason. Hello? And the greenback is the secondary, tertiary fraud scheme of all these Mogadishu pirates, these land pirates that are controlling their nations, their failed state.
And way back in the day, I think it was 3 years ago, the DHS, Minnesota DHS whistleblower came forward. He lost his job. He can't get a job in Minnesota because he's been blackballed because he told the truth. And we're looking at somewhere between 300, 400, 500, 600 to $1 billion a year that's been stolen annually for the last 10 years. Elaborate wire transfers all over the world. The federal government was involved with tracing the money. The BCA was involved. The FBI was involved. And they traced this money going from, forget about the suitcases full of cash. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in addition to that they found in wire transfers going from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, which is in the airport, which is the hub for the United States in terms of distribution center for all that money, traced it from here to Dubai, Amsterdam, to Dubai, to
United Arab Emirates.
Yep, and back into Somalia. So my argument is we killed him. We got him killed. Give you another example.
I like how you wrapped that back to what we started talking about. Good.
Here we go again. Here's another one. You can't see it very well, but her name is Morgan Evenson, 26 years old when this occurred. This is back in 12/26/2017 during the Christmas season. This poor young lady walking home in the eclectic uptown area of Minneapolis, walking home from work, was jumped by a Somali man, stabbed 14 times, and was being dragged off into the bushes for guess what next, when the neighbors who heard the commotion saved her life. She recovered from her wounds, 14 stab wounds, and took Governor Dayton's advice. Left the state.
Right.
Left the state permanently.
And clearly she's not wanted here, right? When she was stabbed 14 times, that was hardly a blip. There were no riots.
Oh, no. Okay?
There were nobody burned any buildings down. That human being, she was stabbed 14 times. No mosque leaders, no Islamic leaders came out to condemn the attack on her. What incredible animus when someone is stabbed. Think of it. When I'm carving a chicken, I treat that meat with respect. When I'm carving a turkey, I don't butcher it. I treat the meat with respect. I respect that's part of my Native American ancestry, perhaps.
Well, let me go one step.
I'm not going to hack it
Well, let me go one step further. I wish that
Oh,
were the only an isolated incident in Minnesota. It is not. That unfortunately has become our new normal. Last year's state fair, the last Saturday night, 30 Somali men, young men, created gang brawls all at the same time on that last Saturday night between 6:30 in the evening till closing, when they almost shut the fair down inside the fairgrounds. Brawls all over the fair. This time they recovered a gun. The year before that, it was the
Valley
Valley Fair
Fair.
amusement park. My grandkids were there. It, they had 100 Somalis starting gang brawls all over the amusement park, and ironically, on law enforcement and first responder appreciation day and evening, which means the
Because after
cops,
all, there were 5 police departments that
six,
responded,
six
6,
police
and a
departments,
SWAT team, a helicopter.
state troopers, and a helicopter to evacuate 15,000 people out of the park, including my grandkids, and shut the park down.
Talk about a valley scare.
Oh,
Talk
go
about a
one.
fright night.
Oh, go one step further. There was no WC, which is the other part of the problem in Minnesota. WCCO TV called it a minor incident. So
Never before.
what's a major incident? I don't know.
I don't know what that would look like. God forbid. I hope we never get to that point, right?
Light rail attacks, gang muggings around the University of Minnesota constantly.
Bathroom stall
Right,
hopping,
right next to
shoving
the
kids,
attacks
shoving
right
kids
next to
off balconies
Target
at the
Field.
Mall of America.
Target Field of broad daylight, the Mall of America. How about this one? Remember when 30 Somali men 3 days in a row,
Lake Calhoun.
Lake Calhoun,
Gotcha.
they
Yep.
in their SUVs, sporting their little ISIS flags,
Threatening to rape women.
I've got the police. I gave that last December 3rd. Keith Ellison said, "Well, that's just that's just." I gave him the article, written by Leo Holman. He says, "Well, that's just an article." I said, "Oh, hold on, let me make your day. Here's the police report, the Minneapolis police report." I told him, "Have a stiff drink before you read it, Mr. Ellison."
That would be against his Islamic.
It was awful. It's awful. You read that report, which also links up to the Mall of America, and nobody got arrested. They threatened to kidnap and rape the women for 3 days in a row, and they got away with it. The solution on the part of the Minneapolis mayor's office? Oh, here she is.
Oh, Betsy Hodges!
Vice-
Yay!
Vice
Hold it
Betsy
straight,
Hodges.
Bob. Straight. No, both sides. Angle it so it's all parallel with the camera. Oh no, we'll have to add these in at the bottom. That's Betsy Hodges in full hijab.
Oh yeah, she gets dressed up to have a listening session. A listening session.
So tell you what, Bob. I want to ask.
She wants to find out from the community, the Somali community, what did we do wrong to create that outcome at Lake Calhoun?
And by
again,
the way,
let me repeat: nobody got arrested.
Let's do a part 2 session, because we're coming up on 40 minutes for this video, which is probably a little bit more than people can digest in one.
No problem.
Sitting.
I've got one more
example. Let's do a part 2 when we come back.
This one. This was Betsy Hodges' solution. They created a hate crime hotline so that if you and I have this conversation about it and engage and object to it, we can be called into the Minneapolis hate crime hotline and be reported for the crime.
Show the phone number so people can hold it up next to your chest so people can report us.
Oh yeah.
612-673-3000.
Guilty.
Yeah. Report your hate speech here, right?
I'm guilty. The reason I'm guilty is that I noticed that this stinks. I don't think anybody
stabbed 14 times by Somali media, migrant media goes dark. Okay, Bob. So
one more.
When we come back,
this stinks too. I think this stinks. I think this really stinks.
Nice. Okay, there we go. Hold that up again, Bob, up in front of your. Okay, right there. Okay, now this is Keith Ellison in a New York bookstore, up a little bit higher. He's
Actually,
writing the Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook by Mark Bray, which
and what
gives
he
you
oh
all
no
the
no
strategies for
his
attacking.
Twitter account says this will put the fear of God into. What are you
Okay,
talking about?
now I have to ask you to go on and mention the endorsement which Keith Ellison, aka Muhammad Hakim's son, gave to the Antifa group on the
On
very day when Trump
on the
declared it a
very
terrorist
Sunday,
organization.
on the very Sunday, two Sundays ago, that the United States Justice Department and the White House declared Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. Jeremiah Ellison, who I would love to get in the ring with, gloves on or off, even at my age.
That'd be
That's
punching down, Bob.
oh
That'd
my
be
word.
punching down.
He then declares his undying devotion and allegiance to Antifa and says it indicates that until someone can prove to him, to his satisfaction, that they are not that they're not engaged in any kind of violence. Have you not been paying attention in the last 2 or
Yeah,
3 weeks? I
right.
mean, what is this, a game show?
See how socialists are? See how Marxists are? They expect everything to be handed to them. We're supposed to do their homework in terms of the data. Okay, Bob, we're going to say bye to session
Yep,
one, and we
fine.
will.
Can we say goodbye to one more guy?
All right.
My pal. My pal. Jailani Hussein at the Minnesota History Center, Hysterical Center.
Minnesota
Islam,
hysteric.
Islam 101. When I said
Oh,
to him at
Lord.
the end of the whole thing, I said, you know, Jailani, I said this to you in Stillwater. I'm going to say it to you again. And I challenged him to the conversation on air. I told him, you are smooth.
Yeah.
He turns to me and says, that's the most racist thing I've ever heard. Smooth?
Yeah.
Give me a break. Back in New Jersey, they'd
Oh,
say to him,
Bob, it's
they say,
probably
don't
the
beat
way
up.
you said it. He heard
Don't,
what you were saying. He
I
knew
was
what.
smiling. Hey, Wes, I was smiling. You know, back in Jersey, I'd say to the guy, hey, don't pee down my leg and tell me it's raining, okay?
I knew you were going to say that before we got done today. See you in part two on the other side. Everybody, stop back for part two of a conversation with Bob Carrillo, iconoclast, general curmudgeon, and Minnesota truth teller and intellectual author. Check out his works online. You can find he's ubiquitous. His work is all over the place. He's a journalist, and
And,
he's one
and
of the few.
all around pain in the butt.
You are a pain in the butt, Bob. For those of us who help you in all sorts of ways, but we love you.
But I am consistent. You got to give me credit for that.
Hey, we're doing a little talking too, huh?
We are, but remember how bad we are.
Conversation.
This is us.
It's a lost art conversation. It's forbidden these days. Too.
We
Yeah.
are the new KKK. I'm so
Wow.
proud.
Wow. That's just sick. Never it happened in Minnesota. Never, ever. See you in part two, Bob.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm ending the recording now. Here we